She called my gift an embarrassment. Right there, in front of 40 people, my daughter held up the card I'd made by hand and said, "Mom, really? A homemade card?" And her new husband laughed. "I thought you said your mother was resourceful," he told her. The table went quiet. My daughter set the card face down on the tablecloth and changed the subject. That was Thanksgiving. 6 months later, I stood in the lobby of Cascade Regional Bank and watched a 20-something teller read my account number off a slip of paper. She typed it in. Stopped. Typed something else. Then she looked up at me with an expression I'd seen before, the look people get when the math stops making sense. "Ma'am," she said quietly, "I need to get our branch director. Would you mind waiting just a moment?" I said I didn't mind at all. "Before we go any further, has anyone ever made you feel small for what you gave them? Not just a gift? Yourself." Drop a comment. I read every single one. And if stories like this are what you come here for, subscribe. Now let me tell you what happened at that bank, and what happened before it, and what my daughter still doesn't know about the house she got married in. The dinner was at my daughter's home in Scottsdale. She and her husband had moved there 2 years after the wedding, into a neighborhood with a gate and a guard and houses that all looked like they'd been ordered from the same catalog. Wide driveways, 3-car garages, lawns that were green in November because someone came twice a week to make sure. I drove up in my '09 Civic, which I'd had since before my daughter graduated high school. The guard waved me through after I gave my name. I parked between a Mercedes and an Escalade and sat for a moment with my hands on the steering wheel. I'd made a card because I didn't know what else to give. Not because I couldn't afford something, because nothing in a store had ever felt like enough for the occasion. My daughter and son-in-law's first Thanksgiving as homeowners. I'd cut the card from heavy cream stock I kept in a drawer, written something inside that I meant, tied it with a piece of twine from the kitchen. It took me 40 minutes to write what was in that card. She said it face down in 30 seconds. My son-in-law. Bryce, tall, confident, the kind of man who says absolutely when he means yes and that's fair when he means no. We filled his wine and steered the conversation toward the square footage of their new media room. My daughter followed his lead the way she always did when something uncomfortable happened. She laughed at his next joke a little too quickly. She didn't look at me for the rest of dinner. I drove home along the I-10 in the dark and thought about the card sitting face down on her tablecloth and whether she'd thrown it away before or after dessert. Probably before. That night, I sat at my kitchen table in the house I'd lived in for 31 years and let the silence settle. The house was small. 2 bedrooms, 1.5 baths. A kitchen where the fluorescent light had buzzed since 2004, and I'd never bothered to fix it because I liked the sound. My neighbors on the left were a young couple with a lab that barked at mail trucks. My neighbors on the right were a retired electrician named Harold, who brought me tomatoes from his garden every August. I didn't cry. I'd stopped crying over my daughter years before that, not because I stopped loving her, but because I understood that grief, left unattended, turns into something harder and more useful. I got up and went to the hall closet, past the winter coats, past the shoebox of old photographs, behind the panel in the back that most people would assume was drywall. The safe was nothing remarkable. Gray metal, combination lock, bought at a hardware store liquidation in 1997 for $40. I worked the dial, my daughter's birthday, before she decided I was something to be managed, and the door swung open. Inside, 38 folders, property documents, sorted by acquisition date, a brokerage account statement showing a portfolio I'd been building since 1991, a separate savings ledger, and in the back, a manila envelope labeled simply, Olive, when she's ready. Olive is my daughter. The brokerage statement showed $4.3 million. The savings account, $1.1 million. The properties, 38 of them, mostly single-family rentals in Phoenix, Tucson, and Flagstaff, appraised collectively at just over $19 million. Not counting the one in Scottsdale, the one she didn't know about. I put everything back, closed the safe, went to bed. I'd started in 1988. I was 34, newly divorced, working dispatch for a regional trucking company outside of Albuquerque. Ruth Ann, my mother, had left me $11,000 when she died, with a note that said, "Don't let anyone tell you what you're worth." I took that money and bought a duplex that everyone said was a mistake. Bad neighborhood. Old plumbing. More trouble than it was worth. I fixed the plumbing myself. Read 3 library books to learn how. Rented both units within 6 weeks. Used the rent to pay my mortgage and save the rest. The rest became the next property. I never told my daughter because I wanted her to understand that the value of a thing isn't what it costs. You learn that by earning something, by watching a number grow slowly because of choices you made, not luck someone handed you. I thought if she didn't know about the money, she'd learn to see me. I was wrong about that. What she learned instead was to be embarrassed, not by me, by the idea of me, by the Civic and the small house and the way I dressed at her wedding. A navy dress from a department store that cost $40 on clearance, which I thought was perfectly fine and she thought was a problem she had to manage from across the reception hall. The Scottsdale property, the one she didn't know about, was the event venue where she got married. Saguaro Ridge Estate, 8 acres in North Scottsdale. She'd found it in a bridal magazine and fallen in love with the desert landscaping, the open-air pavilion, the infinity pool that photographed beautifully at golden hour. She told me it was booked 2 years out and that Bryce's family was covering the venue cost as a wedding gift. What Bryce's family didn't know was that the venue cost nothing. Because I owned it. I bought Saguaro Ridge in 2017 when the previous owners, a couple who'd sunk their retirement into it and discovered that running an event venue is harder than attending events, put it on the market at a price that didn't reflect what it was worth. I paid $2.4 million through a holding company called Sonora Asset Management. My initials, my money, my property. I'd hired a property manager named Clifford to run the day-to-day. Clifford was 60, meticulous, and had been in hospitality management for 30 years. He knew how to keep a venue profitable and how to keep an owner's name out of the conversation. When my daughter selected Saguaro Ridge and Bryce's family negotiated with the venue coordinator, they were negotiating with Clifford, who gave them a standard rate and said nothing else. Olive got married on my land. She walked across my flagstone under my desert willow trees and stood beside Bryce at the edge of my infinity pool and made her vows with my mountains behind her. And when she set my card face down at her Thanksgiving table and her husband laughed, I thought about that for a long time. The morning after Thanksgiving, I drove to Cascade Regional Bank and asked to check the balance on my savings account. The teller, young woman, professional, clearly knew enough to still look genuinely startled by large numbers, pulled up my account and went still. She got the branch director. The branch director got the wealth management liaison, a woman in her 50s named Patricia, who had the practiced calm of someone accustomed to conversations where the numbers had a lot of zeros. "Mrs. Holt," she said, once we were seated in a private office, "this account was opened in 1989. You've made consistent monthly deposits for 35 years. She paused. "And no withdrawals. That's correct?" "The current balance, including compounded interest, is $140,000. I knew the number. Hearing it spoken out loud by a stranger in a quiet room made it feel different. "I'd like to liquidate and transfer," I said. "To my investment account, all of it." Patricia didn't blink. "Of course. We can process that today." She folded her hands on the table. "Is there anything else we can help you with?" I thought for a moment. "Yes, I need the name of someone good. A private investigator. Discreet." She wrote a name on the back of her business card without hesitation. In her line of work, wealthy clients asked for stranger things. His name was Russell Keene. Former sheriff's detective, now private. He worked out of a beige office park in Tempe that looked like a dentist's suite from the outside and smelled like old coffee inside. He was 58, soft-spoken, and had the kind of face that people instinctively told things to. "Bryce Calloway," I said, sliding a photograph across his desk. My son-in-law. Married my daughter 11 months ago. I need to know where his money comes from. Russell looked at the photo. What makes you think there's something to find? He earns $94,000 a year as a commercial loan officer. He owns a $1.2 million home, drives a leased Porsche, belongs to a country club with a $15,000 initiation fee, and took my daughter to Tuscany for 3 weeks last summer. Russell nodded slowly. That math doesn't work. No, I said. It doesn't. He found the problem in 8 days. We met at a diner off the 101. Russell came in with a manila folder and ordered decaf and laid out what he'd found. The way a man lays out evidence. Carefully, without drama, like the facts were enough. Bryce had a side business. Not illegal on its face. A property consulting LLC he'd registered in Delaware. But the clients of that LLC were mostly developers he'd steered loans toward at his bank. Loans that got approved faster than they should have, at terms that were better than the applicants qualified for, and some of those developers, Russell had traced 3 of them, had paid Bryce's LLC fees that looked suspiciously like kickbacks. Referral fees for favorable treatment. Bank fraud? I asked. At minimum. Possibly wire fraud depending on how the payments moved. The loans themselves are federally backed. Russell wrapped his hands around his coffee cup. If the OCC or the FBI gets involved, this isn't a fine. This is prison time. My daughter had no idea. Russell had checked. Her name wasn't on the LLC. Her bank accounts were separate. She hadn't received any of the payments. She doesn't know, he said. No, she wouldn't. What do you want to do with this? I looked at the folder. At Bryce's face, in the surveillance photo, him walking into a restaurant with a developer whose loan had sailed through in 11 days when the standard was 45. Confident, comfortable, a man who thought he'd built something that would hold. I told Russell I needed to think. I thought for 2 days. Then I drove to the public library in Chandler, sat at a terminal in the back row, and submitted an anonymous tip through the FDIC's whistleblower portal. Federally insured bank. Federal oversight. I attached everything Russell had given me. The LLC filings, the payment records, the loan timelines, the developer connections. Organized it clearly. Wrote the summary plainly. I cleared the browser, deleted the history, walked out into the parking lot. My phone showed 2 missed calls from Olive. I didn't call back. She called 4 more times over the next 3 days. I let them go. Not out of anger, out of clarity. She wasn't calling to apologize for Thanksgiving. She was calling because something in Bryce's world was starting to vibrate at the wrong frequency, and she could feel it without knowing why. On the 4th day, I drove to Saguaro Ridge. Clifford was in the event barn reviewing next season's bookings when I arrived. He walked with me across the grounds, past the pavilion, past the pool, across the flagstone terrace where my daughter had been photographed at golden hour looking like she built this world herself. I need to change direction with the property, I told him. He waited. I want to convert it. Affordable senior housing. The kind of place where someone who worked their whole life at a job people overlooked can actually afford to live. Clifford was quiet for a moment. He'd worked for me for 7 years and knew better than to argue when I used that tone. The main structure can be retained and converted, he finally said. The pavilion comes down. The event barn becomes common space. We're looking at 48 to 52 units depending on layout. 18 months, maybe 24. Start the process. He nodded. Permits? Architects? Zoning variants? I'll have a framework by end of month. I looked out across the 8 acres. Desert willows in early morning light. Saguaro ribs against a pale blue sky. The infinity pool reflecting nothing but clouds. One more thing, I said. Cancel all future bookings under the Callaway name. Clifford made a note. Understood. Olive showed up 3 days later. I was at the property when she arrived, watching the first structural survey team do their walkthrough. She drove up fast, parked badly, got out in yoga pants and a fleece, her hair in a ponytail. She looked like she'd driven straight from bed. Mom! She was breathless. What's happening here? I got a notice that our anniversary booking was canceled. What are you... Do you know these people? Why are you here? Because I own it, I said. She stopped walking. What? Saguaro Ridge. I've owned it since 2017. I kept my voice even, through a holding company. Clifford manages it for me. She looked at Clifford, who nodded once and found somewhere else to be. You, she turned back to me. You own the place where I got married? Yes. She looked at the survey crew, at the equipment, at the flagstone under her feet. What are they doing? Preliminary assessment. I'm converting it to senior housing. The color left her face. You're... what? No. Mom, this is a historic venue. There are bookings. There are people the bookings are being managed. The venue has served its purpose. Its purpose? Her voice rose. This is where I got married. This is where we were going to have our anniversary party. You can't just... I can, actually. She stood there in the desert morning, the kind of silence that has weight to it. Then, quietly, how many properties do you own? 38. She sat down on the low stone wall along the terrace. Just sat down on the low stone wall along the terrace. Just sat down, like her legs decided without asking her. You're a dispatcher, she said. You've been a dispatcher for 30 years. I was. I retired 2 years ago. But yes, how? The same way anyone builds anything. Slowly, carefully, without telling people who'd talk me out of it. She looked up. I would have talked you out of it. No, I said. You would have spent it. She flinched. I hadn't said it to hurt her. I said it because it was true, and she knew it. Mom. Her voice cracked. I set her card face down. I know. I didn't even open it all the way. Bryce was watching, and his mother was watching, and I panicked. I know that too. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth. Was there anything in it? The card? Just words. That I was proud of you. That I hoped the house felt like a home. She bent forward, and I watched my daughter, for the first time in years, cry like she meant it. Not performance. Not management. Just grief. I sat down beside her on the stone wall. Not close enough to hold her. Close enough to be there. After a while, her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. It's Bryce. She didn't answer it. He's been weird for 2 weeks. Stressed about something at work. He won't tell me what. I know. She looked at me. What do you know? Come to Saguaro Ridge in 10 days, I said. Saturday, 2 in the afternoon. I'll explain everything then. Why can't you tell me now? Because some things you need to see to believe. She stared at me. Is Bryce in trouble? That depends on what he's done. Her phone buzzed again. She ignored it. Should I be scared? You should be paying attention, I said. There's a difference. The 10 days pass the way days do when something is coming, faster than you want, slower than you can stand. I spoke twice with Special Agent Dennis Farrow from the FDIC's Office of Inspector General, who had followed the anonymous tip to its logical conclusion and opened an investigation that had apparently already been corroborated by 2 other sources inside Bryce's bank. He called me the first time to verify documentation, the second time to discuss what I'd requested. You want us present at a private property, he said, on a specific day. I want my daughter to hear the truth from someone with a badge, not from me. If it comes from me, she'll defend him. She won't be able to help it. A long pause. That's not standard procedure, Mrs. Holt. I understand. I'm not asking you to arrest him in front of her. I'm asking you to be there when the truth comes out, so she can't be told later that it wasn't real. Another pause. Send me everything showing your daughter had no involvement. I sent it that night. Saturday came clear and warm, the way October mornings sometimes do in the desert when the heat has finally pulled back and the light turns honest. I was at Saguaro Ridge at 1:30. The survey crew was gone. The grounds were quiet. The infinity pool still held water. That would be one of the last things to go. At 1:50, Olive arrived. She walked across the terrace slowly, looking at everything like she was trying to memorize it before it changed. She stopped when she saw me. You look tired, she said. I'm fine, Mom. She stood there. I've been up every night this week. Bryce keeps getting calls he takes in another room. He came home 2 nights ago and just sat in his car in the driveway for 40 minutes. She swallowed. What did you do? I protected you, I said. The way I always have. You just didn't always see it. Before she could respond, tires on the gravel drive. Bryce's Porsche, moving fast. He parked and got out still in his work clothes, jacket off, tie loosened. Behind him, a second car, his mother, Renata, in cream linen and sunglasses, who had never in 3 years of knowing me looked me in the eye. They walked across the flagstone. Bryce scanned the property with the expression of a man who's been calculating exits. Olive called me, he said, looking at me, not her. What's this about? Honesty, I said. He almost laughed. Right. Because you've been so forthcoming. You own this place? You've been, what, watching us this whole time? Playing some game? I've been building something, I said calmly. Which is different. Renata stepped forward. Whatever this is, it's inappropriate. Bryce has a very demanding. The sound of another car stopped her. A gray sedan pulled into the lot. Agent Farrow got out, along with a younger agent I hadn't met. Both in plain clothes, badges on their belts. They walked across the terrace and Bryce went completely still. Bryce Calloway? Agent Farrow said. Bryce's jaw worked. Yeah. Dennis Farrow, FDIC Office of Inspector General. We've been investigating irregular loan approvals and payment transfers associated with Calloway Consulting, LLC. I'd like to speak with you. This is... Bryce turned to Renata. This is a mistake, Mom, Mr. Calloway. Farrow's voice was patient, immovable. We have documentation of 14 referral payments from developers to your LLC, paid within 30 days of favorable loan decisions on applications they submitted to your bank. We have wire transfer records. We have email communications. Those were legitimate consulting fees. For what service? Bryce stopped. We have testimony from 2 of the developers who will be cooperating with this investigation, Farrow continued. I'm not here to arrest you today. I'm here to inform you that this investigation is active and that you'll be receiving a formal notice this week. You should contact legal counsel immediately. Olive hadn't moved. She was standing very still, looking at her husband. Bryce, she said. Quietly. He looked at her, and I watched him make the calculation that men like him always make when the structure collapses. He looked for someone to blame. This is your mother, he said. She did this. She's been against us since the beginning, since before the wedding. She gave you that homemade card like a passive-aggressive statement, and when you handled it the way anyone would, I handled it by setting it face down, Olive said. Because it was embarrassing. Don't. Her voice was flat. Don't make this about a card. She turned you against me. You turned yourself. Olive looked at him the way you look at something you've been trying not to see for a long time. You've been taking calls in the garage. You sat in the driveway for 40 minutes 2 nights ago and came inside smelling like cold air and couldn't look at me. She paused. How long? He didn't answer. How long, Bryce? The bank was pushing for numbers, he finally said. Everyone does it. It's relationship-based lending. The fees were disclosed. They were structured as, were they legal? Silence. Renata put her hand on her son's arm. Don't say anything else. We need to call the attorney. She steered him toward the car. He went. At the edge of the terrace, he stopped and looked back at me. Not at Olive. At me. You own this place, he said. You sat there while we planned the wedding, He shook his head. Why? I bought it because it was a good investment, I said. What you did with it was your choice. He left. Renata followed without speaking. Pharaoh nodded at me. We'll be in touch, Mrs. Holt. He and his colleague walked back to their car. Olive and I stood on the terrace alone. After a long time, she said, Did you know? Before the wedding? I suspected. I confirmed it after. And you didn't tell me? Would you have believed me? She didn't answer, which was its own answer. I believed he loved me, she said finally. I believed. I thought if I had the right house and the right neighborhood and the right wedding venue. She stopped. I thought that's what mattered. I know. You tried to tell me. Not with words. She looked down at the flagstone. You made me a card. You showed up in a $40 dress. You drove an old car to my fancy neighborhood and I was embarrassed. You were. I'm sorry. She looked up. I know that's not enough. It's a start. She looked out at the property. The desert willows, the gravel paths, the pavilion that would be coming down in 2 months. Senior housing, she said. 52 units, teachers, nurses, people who spent their careers doing work that nobody noticed. She was quiet for a moment. People like you. People like me. She sat down on the stone wall where she'd sat 10 days before. I sat beside her. What happens to me now? She asked. Practically, if there's a trial, you're not involved. I gave the investigators documentation proving you had no knowledge of or access to the LLC. Your accounts are clean. I paused. You'll need a lawyer. I can refer you to someone good. You have a lawyer. I have several. She almost laughed. The almost laugh turned into something else for a moment, and she pressed her hand to her face. Then she straightened. Is there money? She asked. In a trust? Or I'm not asking because I want it. I'm asking because I need to understand what's real. There's a trust. $1.1 million. It was always meant for you. When do I get it? When you've earned the right to manage it. I turned to look at her directly. That's not a punishment. It's the same standard I held myself to. She nodded slowly. How do I earn it? Come work with me. Clifford needs someone to coordinate the conversion project. Permits, contractors, tenant applications. It's detail work. Unglamorous. Nobody's going to take a picture of you doing it. And if I do it, then you'll understand what you're being given. She sat with that for a while. The afternoon light was going soft and gold, the way it does in the desert when the day starts winding down. The saguaros threw long shadows across the gravel. I'm going to need a place to stay, she said, while everything gets sorted out. I have a house in Mesa, 2 bedrooms, good neighborhood, currently between tenants. How much is the rent? I looked at her. Market rate, I said. You pay your own way? She nodded. Okay. We sat there until the light changed. Not mother and daughter exactly, not yet. Something earlier than that. 2 people sitting on a stone wall in the desert, figuring out what comes next. The conversion took 22 months. I was on site most days. So was Olive. She started on permits, a bureaucratic maze of zoning variances and inspections that she attacked methodically, learning as she went, calling me at night with questions about easements and setback requirements and fire code applications. I answered all of them. She started keeping a notebook. The notebook filled up. She bought another one. By month 6, she was managing 2 contractors simultaneously. By month 12, she was fielding tenant applications, reviewing income documentation, checking employment histories, writing up her recommendations in a format I'd shown her once, and she'd improved on her own. She made mistakes. She fixed them. She didn't ask me to fix them for her. Clifford told me in month 14 that she was better at tenant relations than anyone he'd worked with in 20 years. I didn't tell her he'd said that. I told her she was improving and that there was more to learn. That was more useful. The morning of the open house, I stood at the edge of what had been the pavilion and watched families move into their new units. A retired postal worker who'd been on a waiting list for 3 years, a home health aide who'd been driving 45 minutes each way to work because she couldn't afford anything closer, a custodian from the school district who'd raised 2 kids on his salary and wanted somewhere decent to live out the next chapter. A woman in her late 60s, retired librarian, had worked 34 years in the public library system, stopped in front of me on her way to Unit 12. "You're the owner," she said. It wasn't a question. "I am." My daughter kept asking why I was so excited about an apartment. I told her it wasn't about the apartment. She looked at the building. "It's about finally having somewhere that was built for people like me." I shook her hand. I didn't say anything because there wasn't anything to add. Olive appeared at my elbow as the woman walked away. "Clifford says tenant placement is complete," she said. "All 52 units occupied as of today." She had her notebook in her hand and her hair pulled back and mud on her work boots from the morning's last-minute landscaping. "Good." She looked at the building, at the former pavilion space, now an open community courtyard with benches and shade structures and a small garden plot. "I keep thinking about the wedding photos," she said. "All that light on the pool. Bryce and I standing there like we'd built something." A pause. "We hadn't built anything." "No." "You had." "Yes." She turned to look at me. "I found the card," she said. "I kept it. It was in a box with some things from the house. I've read it several times." I didn't respond. "You wrote that you hoped the house felt like a home." Her voice was careful, measured. "It didn't. Not once." She paused. "This does." We stood there in the October morning while the librarian in Unit 12 opened her front door and left it open, letting the light in. That evening, I went home to my house. Not the Mesa property, not one of the 38. My house. The 2-bedroom on a quiet street where the fluorescent light still buzzed and Harold next door still brought tomatoes in August. I could live anywhere. I knew that. Some days I thought about it. Something bigger, something quieter, something with a bathtub that didn't groan when you filled it past a certain point. But this house knew me. I'd refinished the floors in this house. I'd painted the kitchen 3 times trying to get the color right. I'd sat at that kitchen table on the worst nights and the ordinary nights, and I'd worked out what mattered, which turned out to be simpler than I'd expected. I unlocked the safe, set the manila envelope on the table, wrote Olive's name on the front in marker, added today's date, put it back. Not yet, but soon. On the wall above the table, I'd framed the card, the one she'd set face down. I'd found it in her trash that Thanksgiving night. Yes, I went back for it after the dinner. After I said my goodbyes, I walked to the trash can by her back door, and I took it. It was wrinkled where she'd folded it. The twine had come undone. I'd framed it anyway. Cream stopped behind glass, my handwriting inside visible through the paper. "I'm proud of you. I hope the house feels like a home." She'd set that face down. But she'd called me 3 times that week. Not because she needed something, just to check in, just to talk. The 3rd call had lasted 40 minutes, and we talked about the tenant applications and a community garden and a contractor who'd overcharged on the lighting fixtures, and at the end she'd said, "Thanks, Mom," in a voice I hadn't heard since she was about 16. I turned off the kitchen light, still buzzing, still not fixed, and stood in the dark for a moment. 36 years of work. 38 properties, 52 families in the building on 8 acres of desert where my daughter once stood in the golden hour light believing she had arrived somewhere. She was right. She just took a longer road to get there. The card wasn't a card. It was a door, and she finally walked through it. I've been thinking about that card a lot lately. The one I spent 40 minutes writing and she set face down in 30 seconds. It's framed on my wall now, and some mornings I look at it and what I feel isn't bitterness. It's something closer to understanding. Not of her. Of myself. Of what I got wrong for a long time and what I finally got right. I got wrong the silence. I thought keeping quiet about what I'd built was a kind of humility. Turns out it was a kind of withholding. I withheld the story of how I'd lived, and without that story, Olive had nothing to measure herself against. She filled the gap with what the world offered instead: the right neighborhood, the right venue, the right husband who drove the right car. That wasn't her failure of character. That was my failure of honesty. I know that now. What I got right was the patience to let consequences do the teaching I couldn't do with words. When Bryce's world started cracking, and it was always going to crack, because you cannot build a life on money you haven't earned and expect the foundation to hold. Olive had to see it without me softening the edges. That's the thing about cause and effect that nobody likes to hear. It doesn't negotiate. You make the choices. The choices make the outcome, and eventually the outcome shows up whether you invited it or not. Bryce invited his. She saw it clearly when there was nowhere left to hide it. What I think about most, though, is the morning she showed up at Saguaro Ridge in her yoga pants with her hair undone. Not the confrontation, not the arrest, not the moment she found out about the properties. Just that moment, her sitting on the stone wall with her hand shaking, asking me if there was anything in the card. And I told her. Just words. That I was proud of her. That I was proud of her. That I hoped the house felt like a home. She hadn't known that. Because I'd written it down and she hadn't read it. That's the part that stays with me. Not the $19 million. Not the 52 families in their new units. The fact that the simplest thing I ever tried to give her, just words, just the truth of what I felt, was the thing she almost threw away without reading, and then spent years trying to earn back the right to hear again. I think the only things worth building are the things that require all three of you. The part that knows right from wrong and won't move off it. The part that figures out how to solve problems other people say are impossible. And the part that keeps showing up to do the work when nobody's watching and nobody's clapping. Olive had to find all three of those parts in herself. The conversion project, the notebooks full of questions, the 6 months without a salary, that wasn't me testing her. That was her testing herself. I just held the door open. The card is still on the wall. The buzzing light in my kitchen is still not fixed. Harold brought tomatoes in August, same as always. Some things you build in 30 years. Some things you build in the quiet of an ordinary Tuesday. Both of them count. Both of them last longer than anyone expects.